question. I'm not sure it's new, but I think it probably needs reminding the B2B world really. Is typically, and I'll apologise to any of my panellists ahead of this, is that typically the photography and illustration is appalling in B2B publications. Yes, illustration's cheap. You don't have to pay a lot of money for illustration. You just need to spend a bit more time finding a great illustrator. We produced a magazine 10 years ago for BDO, Stoy Hayward, accountancy firm, called 33 Thoughts, and it revolutionised what all those other big accountancy firms were doing. So I described, if you were sort of the publications that the likes of KPMG and PwC were producing, was for sort of boring pinstriped men, really, and their publications reflected that. Well, the world wasn't run, fortunately, anymore by boring pinstripe men. It was run by men who are in jeans and t-shirts going to work, and a lot of women, and more so women. So they weren't going to engage with that. So we produced this, it's sort of quite highly designed, lots of illustration, great typography, and I think it's creatively, B2B seems to be stuck in the dark ages in some respects, not every respect. And I don't think, I always say to people that, great design doesn't cost any more than rubbish design, really. So just design better, engage better, use illustration. Illustration is really cheap. There's some brilliant young illustrators out there, and I'd use more illustration, really, really good. But be different. I mean, we've been copycatted 1,000 times from what we did with BDO 10 years ago. So it's all about creating something new as well.
Do you want to add something different?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've been trying to do at E&T for quite a while. People are familiar with it. There seems to be an underlying assumption sometimes that if you're a trade mag, you've got to be boring, and I think that's rubbish. Your readers are just the same people as the people actually who are reading the consumer magazines. Your readers are not just engineers or accountants. They're real people with real lives and real concerns and hobbies, and they watch television, and they do all the things that everyone else. They're part of society. They're not just functionaries doing a job, and it's really important to realise that. And therefore, yes, you bring in the good illustration, the certain sense of humour here and there, depending on your audience. And you produce something much livelier and much better. So I think that's what they can learn from the consumer magazine.
I spent 10 years saying that that B2B shouldn't be ashamed of being different from B2C and shouldn't feel like a correlation. So I'm going to kind of skip part of that question, but I do think there is a massive challenge relating to what we were saying earlier on about the kind of the changing business publications. I do think that the old school formats are increasingly disappearing, and I think that we're seeing publications that need to entertain a bit more. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is there is a real I see there as being a split in terms of the business audience. There is the digital natives, and there's what I like to call the digital refugees, who are people like myself who are kind of finding themselves in digital channels, not necessarily through choice, and they're kind of washed up somewhere where they need to adapt to this environment, which they don't necessarily feel massively comfortable in. And the two audiences, it's of course it's a generalisation, that respond differently to different channels. And as these digital natives become more and more important in the organisation, all of our habits, all of the information sources and formats that we'll need to utilise will need to change quite radically. And we're starting to see that as they become more and more senior in organisations, and their ways of behaving become more embedded in the kind of corporate hierarchies and structures, and become more informal, become more digitally reliant, become more utilising digital channels and things like that. So I think that's going to have a great bearing. I think we're going to have to adapt continuously to survive in that.
I've noticed there is definitely a generational change, and I've noticed it in market research on magazines over the years, is that people expect something that looks better, feels better. I think there is a certain age, particularly male of a certain age, perhaps over 50, who were never big magazine readers because they missed that men's magazine thing, and perhaps they have a slightly different attitude. But otherwise, most people, they expect something better these days.
I think that one of the interesting things actually is that on tablet, by and large, it's a massive generalisation. I think there's some great consumer titles and there's some really crap business titles. But by and large, I think tablet publishers, business tablet publishers are actually doing more creative and more exciting things on iPad and to a lesser degree on Android, certainly in Europe on Android. And actually, I think the creativity that you have seen in the design, and I totally agree with you on learning from consumer. I think there's so many badly designed business titles, but actually, I think that creativity that you see in the consumer space, business publishers actually have kind of are leading the way in tablet publishing. I don't know if anyone else agrees with me on that one.
Well, certainly there's a queue for B2C publishers wanting to learn from B2B publishers. So, maybe it's not all in the way it looks, it's maybe in what the substance of the situation is. And certainly it's moving to an age about data, it's moving to an age about registration walls, it's moving to an age of access through metering, it's moving to maximising the audience through channels. And actually, a lot of B2C publishers think they can just throw money at the problem and solve the problem, and they can't. And I think, whilst their publications might look better, they might see more effect.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, I think that it isn't all one way. The business magazines tend to be ahead of the consumer and digital channels, did things earlier because they had to.
And back to the point, but also just relate to that, sorry, the demand generation side of things, and that's one where in purely marketing terms, B2B has clearly led the way. Technology was pioneered in B2B, and it's B2C that's playing catch up there. So, and that relates very strongly to content usage, because content drives marketing automation and it drives lead generation or demand generation, or whatever you want to call it, in the B2B world. And so that's an area where we, as a sector, are very, very helpful. But some of our content may not look as good or be as sexy, certainly.
The only other thing I'd say is, which is relevant across all media, is time, really. So in terms of what I get in terms of trade titles, I get Retail Week, Campaign, Marketing Week and Marketing, and they sit on my desk and I barely ever pick them up and read them. Partly because all the news is at least 6 days old by the time I've read it. So I think it's how do you turn your business news into instant news, and I think in a digital age, I think what people want is they want comment that day that something happens, and if you're reading about it 4 or 5, 6 days later, and if you're monthly, 3 weeks later, you are going to die very, very quickly, and it's not going to be it's going to be a very painful death as well, unfortunately.